If you don't keep your promise, you piss the reader off. If you do keep your promise, all of a sudden the reader goes, thank you, I love you, and I want more.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gumroad podcast. I'm your host, Justin Nicolas, a senior writer at Gumroad, where I deconstruct the tactics, strategies, and processes of top creators. Each week on the podcast, I interview creators and digital entrepreneurs who are at the top of their field. On this week's episode, I interviewed digital writer Nicolas Cole, creator of Write the Ship and co-creator of the Ship 30 for 30 writing community. We talked about writing well on the internet, creating your own category, ghostwriting, and more. I just loved Cole's insights, especially about writing. Enjoy. Today on the podcast, I'm happy to have Nicolas Cole, and I know you go by Cole, so I'll address you that way. Cole, thanks for being here.
Dude, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I've been chatting online for a while. We're kindred spirits, fellow writers. You started at the age of 17 writing. You're a gamer, and you had this terrifically popular blog. Then got into bodybuilding and started to create content around that. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your story and how you've risen in this steep ascent since then?
The non-linear ascent. Yeah. Many lives. I was a pro gamer as a teenager, wrote about it, had a big blog around that. Got really into bodybuilding when I was in college, wrote about that. I mean, that's how I built another audience all around health and fitness and all of that.
Including
and then also created my first product that way. Yeah, I had this Quora answer. I started writing on a site called Quora in 2014. And I had this Quora answer go crazy viral, which was the question is it possible to change so much that you no longer recognize yourself? And I put this before and after picture of me as a teenager. I was undiagnosed with celiac disease. I was really underweight. I was constantly missing school. Like, I had a very difficult childhood because of that. And then I had this picture on the right of me like 10 years later as this shredded bodybuilder that looked like I had eaten my former self, like just could not be more different. And I was explaining the differences and the similarities between the two, wrote it in 20 minutes, put it up on Quora, went front page of Reddit, did 1 million views in like 2 days. And that I'm just my email just got bombarded with questions. What's your workout routine? What do you eat? What's your diet? And that was my first real realization that I was probably 23 years old, 24, that if you understand what questions people are asking, that's how you create products. That's how you write things that resonate. You have to understand what question you're answering.
Yeah. So this is the thing that when I profile a bunch of Gumroad creators, this is, I think, the thing that sticks out in every one of their stories, that they consistently start getting asked similar questions that they don't have the bandwidth to answer individually. Yep. And therein lies the opportunity. And King of Solid has called it something like, that's the market imbalance, the spillover that you start to notice. Mm-hmm. And there's a market demand then that you need to fulfill. And you are a market of one, or rather, you have positioned yourself to be the only person who can answer it to their satisfaction.
In the way that either they want answered, or in the unique way that you're able to frame the problem. Because that's the thing, is a lot of people ask similar questions, but the person who gets rewarded for answering it usually frames the problem or frames the solution in a different way. And so, for example, the way that I framed myself, the reason why that Quora answer hit, the reason why my email started getting bombarded was because I didn't know this at the time. So there's 3 different kind of body types. We're testing my fitness. No, I haven't thought about this stuff in 8 years, right? There's ectomorph, endomorph, and mesomorph. Okay, these 3 kind of body types. And when you're an ectomorph, you are me. Like, I weighed less than 100 pounds as a senior in high school. My metabolism was through the roof. Like, you have no body fat. You know what I mean? Like, your body's just churning all the time. And so in order to put on muscle for that type of body type, it's extremely difficult. I was eating my body weight in chicken and rice and broccoli every day. Like, the amount that I had to force feed in order to put on weight was like astonishing. And so when I would write about these things on Quora, basically I was niching down and I was saying, I'm not an endomorph. I'm not a mesomorph. I'm not pretending to know anything about that, but I am a hardcore, naturally born ectomorph. I have a very hard time putting on muscle. Here's how I did it. Well, every email that I got was from every kid who's also an ectomorph going, my metabolism's through the roof. How do I put on muscle? So it's the framing of the problem where I go, your problem isn't you want to put on muscle. Your problem is that you're an ectomorph with a metabolism that's rampaging like a T-Rex, and you don't know how to eat enough to put on muscle. That different framing makes the person go, you understand the problem that I have in a way that other people do not. Yeah. So if you take that thinking and apply it to anything, all of a sudden then you get into the category discussion, right? He who frames the category, he who frames the problem is then the one best positioned to provide the answer.
The thread that I want to pull on in this conversation is moving from that point as a creator, if you will, to establishing a legitimate and sustainable business around a market demand that you can fulfill. So let's say, for example, you're a creator who thinks, let's just craft a product, build it, publish it on Gumroad or some other service for $10, and you try to make money from that. I know that you're deeply thoughtful on the fact that it's a much broader conversation than just that, to actually establish yourself in the market and then create a business around it. So I would love if you could just unspool for a while on that topic.
Yeah, so there's a handful of things that you just said that we have to like really slow down and look at the nuances of the language, because this is what everyone says, and it is misleading thinking. Okay, so this idea of you notice there's demand, you notice there's a market, and then you create a product to fulfill that demand. Okay, this is a little bit flawed, because what you're really doing is you're saying, hey, someone else already created this thing and it's working, and I'm going to see if I can come in and take my sliver of it. There's existing demand, which means there's an existing category. Well, if there's an existing category, someone had to have created that. And so whoever created that probably owns it. So at best, you're walking into someone else's game saying, I hope I can take my sliver, which is what most people do with a $10 ebook or whatever, a product or whatever. The thing is, it's not about catering to existing demand. There was no existing demand for people who wanted to rent out their living room to a stranger who was going to stay in their house, right? There was no existing demand. Airbnb creates demand. And so when you're creating a product or you're creating a service, what most people do is they go, this market exists and boy, is it catching fire. I want to try and create something that fits into it so I can take my little sliver. Okay. And that's a rat's race. It's a loser's game. It's like you're showing up to someone else's party being like whispering into everyone's ear, being like, I throw really great parties too. It's pointless, right? Instead, what you want to do is you want to go, look, I have a different awareness of the problem, or I am aware that you're experiencing a problem that hasn't yet been framed, or no one is owning this unique thing that you're struggling with. I'm going to frame the problem, and then I'm going to educate you on all of the things you're currently experiencing that you would no longer experience once I solve this unique problem for you. And that's very different than tapping into existing demand. Now you're creating demand and you're creating the value because you're educating the person on the difference between where they are and where they could be. And this is like the single point of failure. This is where everyone goes, I want to create a product. What market is catching fire? Right? Okay, well, you're going to show up to someone else's game and at best take 1% of the market. At best take 20% of the market, right? But you're never going to be the king. You're never going to own it. So instead, you want to look for, gather data by understand what problems are people experiencing. Sure, learn, iterate. But once you notice something, so in the bodybuilding example, right? I notice ectomorphs have a very specific problem. No one is framing that problem. I named my ebook series Skinny to Shredded. It's a different problem, right? You're skinny right now, but you want to put on muscle, which is very different than you're fat and you want to lose weight. right? Which is where like 99% of the focus for everyone else was. So all of a sudden now we frame a different problem and everyone goes, oh my gosh, I didn't know I had that problem. I'm a skinny person. Now I want this too, right? So it really, there's so many nuances here that get just glossed over and people are like, I want to find product market fit. All right. So you're going to go try and fit your product into someone else's category. And you're going to be considered like a next best alternative to the category king.
Let's do a case study here on Ship 30 for 30. So the ordinary thing you would do if you entered into the Twitterverse or the online universe and said, I would like to motivate people to write, to put themselves out there. And Ship 30 for 30 is so brilliantly conceived because the copy that you use on the Ship 30 for 30 website, after you read that website, it's like it is impossible to say no because of the value prop that you're offering. But Ship 30 for 30 was so unique. It's like everyone talks about shipping product and shipping product consistently, but doing it for 30 days with these atomic essays, which were branded. It's just tell that story. And were you there present at the creation?
Dickie created it. I basically helped him take what he created and then poured gasoline on it. But he was smart. And what he did that was smart was it was a different awareness of the problem, right? Imagine if he said, I'm launching Ship 30 for 30, become a better writer. That word actually means nothing, right? That actually means zero. Instead, he goes, I'm going to be specific about the problem. You can't write every day. And every writer on earth goes, yeah, you're right. I can't write every day. And he goes, well, that's interesting because I've created a solution to help you build a daily writing habit. Now, every person is going to sit there and go, that is so weirdly specific. The market for that's going to be so small. Until you realize that what category creation is all about is finding a specificity that is universal.
I love that.
So all throughout this, I want to share some little like neon signs. Like when you notice this, like this is what's happening. Okay. So a neon sign that I've learned, anytime someone says that's too narrow, that almost always means that is actually the thing that is so specific that it's universal. Because when you're so narrow that it's uncomfortably specific, that's what triggers the emotion. But what most people do is they go, I'm creating this thing for everybody. It's a writing group for everybody. Well, another good friend of mine, great copywriter, his name's Craig Clemens, he was the one who taught me, okay, if you try and write something for everyone, you write something for no one, right? And so then the second big mistake that people make is they go, okay, well, I'm going to be different. We're this that currently exists, but better. We're this that currently exists, but we're cheaper. We're this that currently exists, but we're smarter. We're more intuitive. So anytime you hear a word, when they're explaining the thing they're creating, and they put the descriptor before it and they go, this is an ER word, better, faster, smarter, cheaper, or more, the most, all of these are comparison statements. And you can only draw a comparison in reference or in context to something that currently exists, right? So what they don't realize they're doing is they're saying, this is a better way to write. Well, the person who reads that subconsciously is asking themselves, well, if you're saying that you're better than something else, what's the thing you're referencing? Because chances are the thing you're referencing is actually the thing that I want. I don't actually want you because you're trying to convince me that you're better, but I want the real thing. And so instead, right, notice the Ship 30 statement is not a better way to write. The Ship 30 statement is build a daily writing habit.
Absolutely.
You are naming the specific problem, which is different than saying, hey, this market exists and we're better. Loser's game, category creation.
Totally agree. Are there any meaningful counterexamples that you've run across where people are just inherently better, more prolific, more talented, work harder, didn't have to create their own category? Or does the category creation actually come in organically, even if you don't try to create your own category, if you're just constantly participating and responding to feedback. And
so, yes. So the times where better, faster, smarter, cheaper, all of that works, it can work, but it works for a small period of time, right? Because you're better for a moment. And then what happens when the next better comes along, right? So it's kind of like, it's not that it doesn't work, it's that it does work, but then you're caught in a cycle of you have to out better the next person who's trying to better you. And then like, you're not actually, you know what I mean? That's a very different and more frustrating game. On the other hand, you have people that do this accidentally. So they don't actually know how they created a category, but they do it just kind of based on intuition and based on whatever. So Jack Butcher is an incredible example, right? Whether he consciously knew it or not, he didn't say better value. He said visualize value. That's a specific modifier of the thing, right? And it's not this exists and I'm comparing and I'm saying I do the same thing, just better. He's saying, no, there's value that you read, there's value that you listen to, and there's value that you visualize. And if you're here for the visualize value, that's what I do. So he created a category without even really sitting there and going, this is what I want. And now no one on Twitter can make a graphic without someone commenting and saying, oh, this looks just like Jack Butcher's stuff.
Absolutely. By the way, very few people know that Jack wrote an article for the Harvard Business Review about this process. It was brief, but he wanted to share his thoughts. And one way he put it there that he very rarely has talked about on Twitter is he simply wants to make intangible things tangible. And you, in the process of doing that, you're sort of inventing a very distinct language and space for yourself.
Yes.
And clearly and I think that was preceded though by like a decade of experience helping other people brand themselves. So it came when the time was ready and ripe for him to really break out. He was completely ready for it.
Totally.
Yeah.
And however you get there, right? Like some people do it accidentally, some people do it consciously. We're kind of skipping straight to the like, here's the game shark, like here's how you beat the game, here's the mental models for it. But notice the difference between what you just said. He's trying to make the intangible tangible, right? That's a category. That is a thing. Versus, hey, tangible, intangible objects are really popular, a lot of market demand. I'm going to make better tangible, intangible objects.
Yeah.
Those are two completely different things, right? And when you're playing the better game, you're trying to tell other people, hey, look at all these features that we have that are better. Look at all these things that we do that are better. When you're playing the category creation game, you're educating people on the difference between the old category, intangible objects, and the new category. Oh, I've made them tangible. What does that unlock? What are all the things that come with that? This is like the great secret.
The next step to studying and learning is like studying, learning, naming, creating the framework, publishing the framework, and then you are then associated with this category of one. There's no one else named it that. And if you can do that several times in a row in iteration and create a series of big ideas that are all like in one philosophical column, then you really own something that is.
So this is what I call languaging. So languaging is the strategic use of language to change thinking. Okay. So it's not just words for the sake of words. Okay. So if you go down this path, if once you frame a different problem, you create the category. So let's stick with we're turning intangible objects tangible. Then the second thing Jack Butcher does or should do is he goes, I'm going to use languaging to reinforce the category from where it was to where I'm taking it. So I'm going to call this framework the turning the intangible tangible framework. And here's how it works. 1, 2, 3. So now he's picking words that are naming the thing that he's playing with, where then every time the person reads it, it reinforces, oh, this is the category. This is the thing. This is why this makes sense. It's the same thing that I do where I'm like, you don't want to blog. You want to write on the internet. It's online writing. And I'm defining online writing as something different than blogging, right? I'm creating that separation between old category and new category. And then I can use languaging to then reinforce, well, what are all the things that make that different? How can I call that framework something? So,
and the next step then is to say the same thing in 1,000 fresh and novel ways. And like, I guess if you think back to Orwell and his whole 6-step process of writing, like there's the fourth or fifth one is there a fresh idiom or metaphor that you can invent that no one's used before? Stale metaphors are the worst. You're literally not inventing a new category. But the people who can step up, elevate themselves, like grab what they're thinking by the scruff of its neck and like pull it up a couple feet, look down at it and say, what is the fresh way I can put this that no one's heard before? Because there's like one idea of expressing yourself. What is the idea I have? But then there's like the idea of the idea, like the meta idea. And if you can get to that meta idea, then it becomes like arresting. Like people haven't heard that phrase. What does that mean? It's intriguing. Maybe we're violently agreeing.
As long as, I totally agree, as long as you're still communicating the clarity of thought. Because the mistake, what most people do there is they aim for clever instead of being clear. Right. 100%. And so they're like, oh, if I'm just clever, I'm witty. Oh, what a cool pun. Right. But what they don't realize is that the reader's literally sitting there going, I don't actually know what you're saying. And if I don't know what you're saying, it could be as clever as you want, but I'm just scrolling right past it because I'm like, I don't get it.
Yeah. I when I was in grad school, I had an instructor, a professor, seal a note to me in an envelope and pass it to me at the end of the semester. And he said, your writing suffers from your constant search for a novel phrase. And I just...
The honesty in that is remarkable.
Absolutely. It changed my writing forever. And the other exercise that changed my writing forever was a college professor who said, write 2 pages on any topic that you want and do not use any conjugated form of the verb to be. So was, were, is, are, etc. And it forces you to use only active verbs, and it changed my writing forever. I never write ever without that teacher's exercise in my head. And short declarative active verbs, obviously it's like the number one thing people learn when they write is not passive voice. But that, there's one thing to understand conceptually not using passive voice, and there's another like difference in forcing yourself never to use passive voice ever. And then, of course, there's wonderful times that you do want to use passive voice for lots of mechanical and stylistic reasons. But anyway, just sharing those.
Yeah, I was actually, so pulling on that thread a little bit, because, I've done a ton of ghostwriting too. And what's really interesting, my opinion on this has changed a lot over the years, is like, you can look at language very mechanically, and be like, oh, you should always use active voice instead of passive voice, whatever. But there are a lot of situations where things that the average person might say, oh, that's grammatically incorrect, or they would be like, oh, that's passive voice. You don't want to use passive voice. Like in actuality, you do want to use it because you want the phrase to come off a certain way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Or beyond that, the real thing, this has been like, there's the literature, geek in me. Almost, I hate saying this, but at the same time, I can't acknowledge that it's not true. I mean, it's true, is that all of the language stuff comes second to one thing. And it's, but fundamentally, what are you saying?
Yeah. So every time I sit down to write, I have to look up at the ceiling and say, what am I trying to say?
Right? Okay.
That's
So
rescues you.
The example that I use all the time, and I do this exercise with, after Ship 30, we have kind of a smaller, more intimate cohort called Write the Ship. And this exercise that I do is I go, okay, everyone, I want you to, if we do it live on Zoom, put it in chat. If you write it out. I want you to list out, we're all going to write an article about how to have an effective morning routine. So I want you to write all the things that you would put in your article about effective morning routine, right? And everyone always says the same things, right? Wake up, drink a big glass of water, stretch, exercise, journal, greet the day, right? Like it's all the same stuff, right? And then you finish and I tell everyone, okay, now let's pull it back and let's all look at all these answers and they're all the same. And then I go, okay, my morning routine article, just for the sake of an argument, is when I wake up, the first thing that I do is I take a shot of tequila. And now all of a sudden, no one remembers anything about all of the other things that got said because they're all the same. They are fundamentally all saying the same thing, but everyone remembers the shot of tequila, right? Because it's different in the context of what we're talking about. So everyone, when we talk about like writing, everyone loves going to like, well, it's active voice, not passive voice. It's grammatically correct. It's this. Like fundamentally, none of that matters unless you stop and question the root. Like, what am I actually saying? Am I telling everyone to just wake up and drink a big glass of water and stretch and have a great day? Great. There's 8 billion articles online that say that. But if you show up and you go, no, step one, drink a shot of tequila first thing, everyone goes, this writer's brilliant. Just never heard anything like this before. That's the secret.
Yeah. When I was a speechwriter some number of years ago, when I was first adjusting to that role, my boss brought me into his office and he said, look, there's a mechanical side to writing. And that's the side you have to nail first, because I don't want you to waste my time having to edit basic grammatical mistakes, for example. But there's also a creative side to writing. And that's where it gets to the elegance, the style, and all of this. But you have to marry those two things together in a way that, in Orwell's words, lets the meaning choose the word and not the other way around. And like, it has to be crystal clear. Like, there can't be a sentence in there that misleads, that confuses you. It's like the only possible product of sloppy thinking is sloppy writing. So like, unscrew your thinking first, get the ideas clear, logically order them, present them. But I think you're saying take it to another level, like make them.
There's a step before that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so can you nail that point home? What is that step like, sort of?
It's literally before you write a single word. It's so simple that it's complicated, right? Is like, but what are you saying? Are you saying, so here's a bunch of just extreme examples, right? Are you saying that we should play electric guitar, or are you saying we should play acoustic guitar? Are you saying we should go north, or are you saying we should go south? Are you saying we should play golf, or are you saying we should play hockey? Right? Like, people don't actually take the time to think about root of root of root.
I see. What you're saying is, what's the one big idea that you're trying to convey? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Like, where are we going with this?
Yeah.
Right?
So, again, when I was speechwriting, the first words that separate boss would say, enter the room and say, what's the headline? Like, what are we saying? The thing? Yeah. What are we saying?
And it's so simple that it's complicated. And what I notice writers do over and over again, right, is they go right in and they're like, I'm going to write about writing advice. Right. And you're like, okay, that's very broad. Okay. What are you saying? Like, are we telling people? And that's why I share all these templates, because it at least helps frame the thinking. It's like, are you saying the reasons why people should write? Are you saying the mistakes that writers make? Are you saying how someone can write a better sentence? Like, specifically, what are we talking about?
Well, oftentimes that won't emerge, the nut graph, if you will, until 60% through the writing process, if not later.
That's completely right. I mean, because I can acknowledge for years, I kind of subscribe to the wastewater technique. You know, you're just filtering, and then 70% of the way you go, oh, now I understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, exactly. And
most people start there, and that's fine. But a couple years ago, again, this friend of mine, Craig, you know, I remember we did a writing session at his place. He lives in this amazing house here in LA, and I'm sitting in his office and we're looking out over the hills, and he goes, all right, we're going to write for 2 hours. And I sat down, we do the first hour, and he turns to me and he's like, how's the writing going? I'm like, good. I got like 3 pages done. and I turned to him and I go, how's the writing going? And he goes, I think I've almost got the headline figured out.
Incredible.
And we were coming at it from 2 completely different angles. I'm just like writing and figuring it out as I go. And he's literally sitting there playing with individual words, being like, what's the headline, right? Like, what am I actually trying to say? I went through this whole debate with him and me, and I was like, I would never start with the headline. Why would you start there? Like, and he was the one who really instilled in me, like, if you don't know what your North Star is, you're going to write for 20 hours and not have made any progress. You have no idea what you're actually saying. And so over the past few years, I've really retrained my whole thinking. It's like a basketball player being like, I'm great with my right hand. I got to learn how to play with my left hand.
Yes, I understand.
And I've rethought my whole thinking now. I actually write headlines way more than I write just freehand. And all of my notes on my phone, everything is like idea, headline, because I'm trying to clarify it and understand what am I actually saying before I go take the time to try and write the thing.
And just to clarify, this is distinct from the idea of a clickbait headline. In other words, what is actually a great clickbait headline is something that is true. So if you hit on something that is true to you, that you can back up, then there's some maybe tactical ways to make it more clickbaity or something, or more attractive. But really the thing that I think you're driving at is like, what's the true thing that you've discovered and want to share? Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, the thing, a lot of people bring this up, especially the way that I kind of explain learning how to write headlines. You know, a lot of the feedback that I get is people go, oh, well, that looks like clickbait. I don't want to learn how to write clickbait. The thing about clickbait is it's only clickbait if you don't keep your promise, right? It's clickbait if I say, hey, here are 9 steps to making your first $1 million as a writer. And then if the 9 steps that I give you are, you got to try really hard. You got to really give it your all. Right? And then you as a reader are like, you liar.
Yeah.
Like, you tricked me.
So that's why the Naval thread, How to Get Rich Without Getting Lucky, was so masterful, because it really did fulfill the promise. It was like, you know, in a way that was almost like abstract and actionable at the same time. It was like taking a lens, changing a lens for people.
If you write really catchy headlines but don't deliver on the promise, it's clickbait. If you write really catchy headlines and then fill your article with incredibly valuable content, you just acquired a superpower. And this is what people don't understand, is that it's not clickbait. What you're doing is you're creating what I call this curiosity gap. You're telling the beginning of the story and you're telling the end of the story, but you're not filling in the middle. So then the reader goes, well, I got to click to fill in the middle. And if they click and you don't fill the middle with something good, you know, if they get like old bologna, then they're going to be like, this is disgusting and I hate you for it. But if you fill it with that sweet, creamy, you know, filling and it's delicious, right? And it's like a pie, then they go, not only did I love this, but I want to read another 10 of your articles because I find it so valuable.
Yeah. And I'm watching a Hemingway documentary right now. It's an old one, but it's on PBS or something on Amazon.
Oh yeah, I watched that one.
Really good. And at some point in the second or third episode, there's this observation that writers who are excellent set a trap for your attention. And that's like similar to what people do with their very first tweet of a thread. It's a trap for your attention.
Yep.
The best threads, most likely or the best threads that I think could possibly be written, say almost everything that the reader needs to hear to understand. But there is a point at which the reader is filling in the gaps himself or herself. And the best writers like leave that space where they're expressing themselves clearly, but the reader, it's like two comic strip. I think I've heard Seth Godin talk about this. It's like 2 comic strip panes. Thing happens in pane A or panel A. Thing happens in panel B. Reader fills in the gap. Mm-hmm. I think that's just a wonderful way of looking at it.
And what you're saying, you know, people tend to say that like this idea of it being a trap, right, is a bad thing. You know, I know a lot of writers, when I start to introduce this thinking to them, they're like, no, I don't want to write that way. As if every movie they turn on ever, right? They don't love that first scene where the trap gets set. And then they're like, now I got to watch for the next 2 hours to figure out who killed who, right? Like setting a trap, quote unquote, it's maybe a bit of I think that's the wrong term for it, because then it prompts kind of this negative feeling. But what you're really doing is you're just making it sticky, right? You're making it where the person walks in and goes, now I don't want to leave. And you can accomplish that in a lot of different ways. But the simplest way that I've gotten to explaining it is you just have to deliver your promise, right? If you don't keep your promise, you piss the reader off. If you do keep your promise, all of a sudden the reader goes, thank you, I love you, and I want more.
Absolutely. Talk a bit about your executive ghostwriting and connect it to the conversation that we've just had. And I'll follow up. What I mean by that is you record or you have a conversation with a billionaire or some very interesting business figure, for example, and you start to live with that content for a bit. Maybe you re-listen to it. And is it that you're channeling like what is the big idea and what are they trying to say? And then you distill it down into some pithy essay. So describe how you do it and what it means by like what are they trying to say?
Well, just because we covered this ground, I'll start one step before that. Okay. So I was writing on Quora for about 4 years. I eventually got my own column with Inc. magazine, wrote 400 columns for them. And all throughout this, I mean, I'm like 25 years old. I'm not an entrepreneur yet. And all I've done is just write on the internet. But what I'm noticing is every time I write about the power of using writing to scale yourself, to share your own insights, at the time I was referring to it as kind of personal branding. That was like the closest thing that I could understand it as. Eventually, I had a CEO reach out to me. He had just sold his company for $1 billion. He was this older dude. And he reached out and he said, hey, I read your Inc. column all the time. I've gone down the rabbit hole, read all your core answers. I would love it if you helped me with my own writing. And it was through that, he called me his ghostwriter. I didn't even know that term existed. He was like, wow, it's like I have my own ghostwriter. And immediately I was like, oh my gosh, like this is a different thing, right? I've never heard of a writer calling themselves publicly a ghostwriter. So category, interesting thing for me to play with. Second is then the more that I do this, the more that I start realizing that these people I'm working with are referring to themselves as, I want to be a thought leader. Same thing. This term in 2015 was very new. So what did I do? I said, I went to one of my closest friends and I said, hey, we're not a marketing agency. We're not a content marketing agency. We're not a blogging agency. We are a thought leadership agency. Different category, right? And it's the same thing as a blog post. It's an 8 to 1,200 word article. But if I call it a blog post, people go, well, I can buy a blog post for $25. Why would I pay you anything more than that? But if I call it a thought leadership article, I can charge $2,000 or $3,000 for it.
It evokes the outcome
right? It evokes the outcome. Someone goes, I want to be a thought leader too, right? Okay, so we build this whole category around this. We scale it, 20 full-time employees, couple million in revenue, like whole thing. And then the process, I've learned that there's two different types of clients, okay? There's the clients that go, I've spent a whole career doing this. I've spent 10, 20 years doing this. I have a lot of clarity around the one big idea. I know exactly what I want to share. So my job is really easy. We talk on the phone, I record the call, and what I'm basically doing is I'm deleting everything from the transcript that is tangential to that.
That's hilarious. But even in a high fidelity conversation, I feel like we're exchanging ideas at a high clip, high rate right now. Even at that high rate, really only 12% of our ideas are the essence of what we've been saying. You know what I mean? So you could delete a lot of the words that we've been exchanging, unfortunately.
Well, 12%, yes. And then I would go even further and say what makes a really great article, this is what I've learned about writing opinion articles, is that in this one conversation, we might share 10 different extremely compelling ideas, but all 10 of those should not go into one piece. Because then it makes it very difficult for the reader to go, what are we actually talking about here?
Gotcha.
So my job is I have the conversation, I get all this insight, and then I go, okay, for this one piece, I'm going to delete these 9 ideas. I'm going to delete all the tangential examples that don't match. And we're just going to laser focus on this one thing. So out of 10,000 words or 5,000 words, you get down to an 800 word succinct piece. And I'm not really doing much. I mean, I'm not doing much else, right? Not to minimize it, but I'm not doing much else than just deleting
Yeah, I
and then
understand that.
filling in the gap, right?
And using your judgment and pattern recognition over time.
Yes. And then all I'm doing is just going, okay, I understand how to format. I understand how readers read this. I know how to clean up sentences. Oh, the way you said that could have been a little bit cleaner, right? Like that's all I'm doing.
Exactly.
The second type of client is the one who goes, I think I have a big idea. I actually don't. I'm going to I'm going to ramble for a really long time, and then this is where I say it, I don't have that many of these, but I have them, is then I'm not just ghostwriting, I'm ghost thinking a little bit.
Yeah.
Because then I have to create the thing that they didn't know they wanted.
So one way of putting it is you are, on the first case, cleaning up thinking and compressing it, making it more punchy. The second way is you're helping someone think. And that's what speech writing is, in essence, is not writing for someone, it's helping them think.
Yep.
In iteration most of the time.
And I want to add, like, this point right here, ghostwriting, I don't know where the stigma comes from, but so many people are like, well, that's not authentic and that's not fair. And that's ghostwriting's not ethical. And I'm like, really? You don't bounce your ideas off of other people in your life? And you don't, like, that's all ghostwriting is you're paying me because you value the way I think.
Exactly.
And you value my ability to play with words. And so you're helping me make your idea better. How is that any different than anything else in life? Because
every successful general ever has had a staff or somebody to bounce ideas off, like Hamilton and Washington, back in the day. Like they were writing with each other.
Anybody at the top of their craft is not just doing it 100% on their own. And if they are, I would argue that they would be a lot better if they let a couple other people in the room going, hey, iron sharpens iron. I can help make your idea better.
Cole, this has just been, wow, a mind-expanding conversation. I think we could just continue it for hours. Maybe we should try to exceed the Balaji, Tim Ferriss conversation someday.
We could go for 5. We could go for that 5-hour mark, man. Whenever you want to set the record, let's do it.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks for being our guest today. And I am keen to see your further ascent online. So thanks for your time.
Well, thanks for having me, man. I love this stuff.
Cool. Talk soon.